Chapter 19 of The Mikado Jewel by Fergus HUME. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Pierard. Chapter 19. The Truth. With the early darkness of February came a spectacle to delight and astonish the homestaying folk of Beckley. Suddenly, at 8 o'clock, when the entire household were gathered on the beach for transport in the launch to the yacht, the Miko became outlined in colored fire. Radiant and weird against the gloom in red and blue and yellow and green, she flashed into being like a spectral Flying Dutchman. Never before had such a sight been seen in that quiet Devonshire bay, and loudly sounded the amazed voices of the servants, praising the gorgeous illumination. It was like magic to them, and several were heard to express a hope that the devil was not on board the ship of light. However, the Japanese officer in charge of the launch, which puffed up, spoke sufficient English to reassure them, and they all embarked for an evening's revelry. The bride and bridegroom, with the two who had witnessed the marriage, had long since gone on board. Mara did not intend to set foot on English soil again, and had taken a final leave of her father. Colpster had not been unkind, although his farewell had been rather cold. But then the newly made Countess Akira was cold herself, and rarely demonstrative, so she did not mind in the least. In fact, Patricia, being a warm-hearted Irish girl, reproved her for the coolness with which she took leave both of her parent and of her childhood's home. "Oh, nonsense," said Mara, with her usual cry. "I wish you'd leave me alone, Patricia. I can't make a fuss when I don't feel the least sorry to go away." "But surely, Mara, you are sad. You leave your home, your father, your native land, for ever it may be?" "Certainly for ever. And now that I know all about the past, now that I am the Count's wife, I don't look upon England as my native land." "Mara, you surely do not really believe that you lived at Kitzuki as a priestess centuries ago?" said Patricia, shaking her head. "I am sure that I did. I was a Miko, which means the darling of the gods." "Did Count Akira tell you that translation?" "No, I remembered it. I spoke Japanese ages ago. I am beginning to recollect all manner of things. And Akira gave me a book of Lafcadio Hearn's, which contains a description of a Miko Kagura. It is exactly what I danced on that evening, and is precisely what I did when I was at the temple." Patricia asked no more questions. The problem was beyond her. She saw that Mara firmly believed in reincarnation, and on that belief based her sudden marriage with Akira. The little man had known her only for a few weeks, and in the ordinary course of things would not have fallen in love with her so rapidly, if indeed at all, seeing that he was east while she was west. Therefore, it really seemed as if what Mara believed was true, and that she had met her husband before in the province of Izumo. In no other way could the puzzled Patricia account for the unexpected which had happened so quickly. And she agreed with Basil that it was just as well that Mara had obtained her heart's desire in this strange way. Had she not met Akira, she would have gone on living in an unhealthy dreamland, and perhaps as she grew older would have lost her reason. But now she seemed to be a different girl, as her formerly pale face was rosy with colour. She looked less shadowy, and strangest of all, she took a profound interest in the entertainments provided for the Beckley servants. This was particularly odd, for Mara never, when she was single, troubled about pleasures of any kind, and certainly took no interest in the likes or dislikes of other people. But over this revelry she presided like a queen, and for the first time in her strange life she appeared to be thoroughly happy. "After all," said Patricia to her lover, who stood by her, while a sailor was singing some legend to the music of the biwa, "the Count is a very charming and highly bred man." "Oh, yes," assented Basil heartily, for, having taken everything into consideration, he now quite approved of the turn affairs had taken. "He is one of the best, is Akira. as good and clever a chap as ever lived. If you do want courtesy and good breeding, you can find them to perfection in a Japanese gentleman. Mara is lucky to get such a husband, considering what a strange nature she has." "It is that very nature which has brought such a husband to her," said Patricia. "I hope and trust and pray she will be happy." "I think so. Akira adores her. Strange when he is East and she is West." Patricia shook her head. "Mara would never admit that, my dear. Only her body is West, according to her. Her soul is Eastern." "Well," remarked Basil, looking somewhat puzzled, "I don't know much about this occult rubbish of which we have had so much lately, but I should think that the soul was of no country at all. It comes on the stage of the world dressed as a native of different countries, just as it is told." "As its karma calls it." "What the deuce is karma?" "The accumulated result of good and evil and—" "Look here, Patricia," interrupted the young man, slipping his arm within her own, "I have had enough of this jargon and occult rubbish. I half believe in it, and I half don't. At all events, I don't think it is healthy for either you or I to indulge in such things. Let us live as two healthy people, my darling, as we have plenty of work to do in this world before we leave it. You agree, don't you?" "Of course I do. I should agree if you proposed to cut off my head." "I prefer to leave it on your shoulders," laughed Basil, and slyly stole a kiss, for they were standing in the shadow. "Look at old Sims, how amazed he is at those Japanese dresses." They pressed forward to look. Some of the sailors were arrayed as samurai in antique armor of the Middle Ages of Japan, and were fighting with huge swords. All round flashed the many-colored lights, and the little group of Devonshire folk sat and stood in their homely dresses, looking delightedly at the fairyland which had been brought before their astonished eyes. The dresses, the music, the unusual food, and the brown faces of the foreign sailors fascinated them greatly. And, indeed, the spectacle was as pleasant to Basil and Patricia as to them, in spite of the fact that they knew more of the world beyond Beckleigh. As to Mara, she was flushed with enjoyment, and so deeply interested in the brilliant spectacle before her that she did not notice the absence of her husband. But he had slipped away silently, and was standing at the stern of the yacht, speaking softly to an Englishman. The light of a near lantern would have shown anyone who knew him that the man was Harry Pentreddle, and he was just getting ready to lower himself by a rope into a rowing boat which was fastened alongside. "You can get ashore in that," whispered Akira softly, "and later I shall send you the launch to fetch you." "I can row back again," protested Pentreddle. "You won't be able to get away quick enough," said Akira mysteriously. "Away from what?" "Never mind. Do what I told you to do, and bring me what I told you to bring me. Obey my instructions implicitly, or there may be danger." "But I don't understand, sir." "You understand enough for my purpose," broke in the Japanese smooth voice. "And you know why I ask you to go ashore to the Hall tonight." "Yes, I know," said Harry grimly, and spat on his hands as he prepared to grasp the rope. "You needn't go unless you like. I can go myself. Well?" For answer Pentreddle clambered over the taffrail and swung himself by the rope into the small craft below. As he took the oars, Akira's voice was heard again even softer than before as he leaned over the side. "The launch will be waiting for you at the pier when you come out," he said. "Lose no time." The boat shot away into the gloom, while Harry Pentreddle wondered why the little man was so insistent about his getting away quickly from the Hall, after what had to be done was accomplished. However, the sailor, being aware of certain facts, was prepared to obey implicitly, and rowed hard to reach the land. There was no time to be lost, as the entertainment would not last forever, and it was necessary that Harry should come back to the Mikado before those on board returned to Beckleigh Hall. It was a calm night, but cloudy and threatening. The rain of the last few weeks had stopped, and fine weather prevailed. But no stars were visible, and the moon was veiled heavily. As Pentreddle beached his boat near the pier and dug her anchor into the damp sand, he felt a breath of wind, and looked into the semi gloom to see that already white crests were forming on the waves. Afar off, the Mikado looked like a fairy ship with her colored lights glittering against the darkness. The wind was distinctly rising, as Pentreddle felt when he passed up the path to the Hall, and on glancing overhead he noted that the clouds were beginning to move. Already a few stars were revealed, and there was an occasional glimpse of a haggard moon lying on her back. "It's going to be a nasty night," said the sailor. "Bad for those folk on board that yacht. They'll be seasick." He chuckled, although he felt far from merry. The errand he was on was too serious to be treated lightly, and he was even nervous as to what would be the outcome of the same. But he strode on resolutely, nevertheless, and was soon standing at the front door of the Hall. The building was in darkness save for one window on the second story near the angle of the wall. Pentreddle, acquainted with the building ever since he could walk, knew very well that this was one of the windows of the Squire's bedroom. On the other side of the wall there were two more. For a moment Pentreddle looked up at the light and noted that the tough arms of the ancient ivy grew up to the very sill of the window, and afforded a ladder to anyone who wished to descend in that way. He smiled grimly when he recalled this fact, which might be useful, and then opened the door. It had not been locked, as there were no robbers at Beckleigh, and bolts and bars were not attended to very particularly. The hall should have had the central lamp lighted, but Pentreddle found the place entirely dark. He did not mind this, as he knew every inch of the way up to Squire Colpster's bedroom. There he would find the old gentleman, and he presumed that Mr. Dane, who had refused to come to the entertainment on the Mikado, would be in his rooms at the back of the house. He walked softly up the stairs, as he did not wish to arouse Theodore, for reasons which he intended to impart to the old squire. Feeling his way in the darkness along the walls, and wishing that he had brought a lantern, Pentreddle gained the second story and walked along the corridor towards the line of light which shone from under the bedroom door. On arriving immediately outside, he paused for a moment to listen. A sound of struggling struck his ear, and he became aware with a thrill that there was a fight going on between uncle and nephew. Considering Colpster's age, this was unfair, so Pentreddle dashed open the door and shot into the room, intent upon taking side with the weaker party. "What's all this?" he shouted. "Help, Harry, help! He's strangling me!" gasped Colpster, recognizing the voice. "Oh, help me, help!" Pentreddle did not waste any time in words. He darted forward, and gripping the shoulders of Theodore, who was holding his uncle down on the floor, he spun him to one side. The squire, struggling to his feet, clawed at the sofa to rise, on seeing which Dane, who was crazy with rage, tried to slip past the sailor and tackle the old man again. "Ah, would you?" cried Harry, who hated Theodore fervently, as, indeed, everyone did. "I'll show you," and in a moment his sinewy arms were round the big man and they wrestled desperately. Theodore was ghastly white, and his blue eyes blazed with unholy fire, as between closed teeth he cursed his antagonist. Huge as he was, the man had only that strength which comes with furious anger. He was flabby, and not at all muscular, since he never exercised himself in any way. Half on the floor and half on the pillows of the sofa, Colpster watched the fight with breathless interest, grasping in his hands a large envelope. The two men swayed and swung round the apartment, and Theodore fought like a tiger. But the wiry sailor was too much for him, and gradually Dane was forced to the floor, where he lay struggling and kicking, with Pentreddle kneeling on his big chest. Harry hailed the half-fainting old man. "Pull down that curtain cord near you, Squire, and throw it over," he panted. Dane gurgled and tried to curse, but could not, as Pentreddle's brown hands gripped his fat throat. Colpster struggled across to the window and took with feeble hands the sunken rope which draped the curtains on one side at no great height from the floor. He crawled back with it to Harry, who at once proceeded to bind Theodore's arms behind his back, and rolled him over for this purpose. Dane was so sick and breathless with the struggle, and in such a bad condition for holding his own, that he had to submit. "Now the other rope, Squire," commanded Harry. But seeing that the old man's strength had given out, he darted across himself to the window and speedily brought back what he required. In a few minutes Theodore, trussed like a fowl, was lying on the floor, face uppermost, and regained his breath sufficiently to curse. "I'll have you arrested for this, Pentreddle," he said viciously. Harry deigned no reply, as he had to attend to Colpster. On a small table near the bed was a decanter of port, with some glasses and a dish of biscuits. The sailor poured out a glass of the generous vintage, and held it to the Squire's lips. He drank it eagerly and demanded more. A second glass brought the colour back into his wan cheeks, and the light of life into his sunken eyes. Shortly he was able to sit up on the sofa, and Harry arranged the pillows at his back. But all the time Colpster held on to the large envelope. Also he fished about feebly under the pillow and brought out the Mikado jewel. "Thank Heaven!" panted the old man feebly. "He has got neither." "I'll get them yet, you old beast," growled Theodore, trying to break his bonds, but vainly. "I'll have that will and burn it. I'll get the emerald and sell it. Curse you, and you too, Pentreddle. What the devil do you mean binding me in this way?" "I'll explain that to you later, sir," retorted Pentreddle, wiping his brow and taking a glass of port himself. "With your permission, Squire," he said in a polite tone when he drank it. "You arrived just in time," said the Squire in stronger tones. "That wicked wretch would have killed me." "Why?" asked Pentreddle quickly. "He came up here and insisted that I should destroy the will I made in favour of his brother and Miss Carrol. Here it is," and Colpster passed along the large envelope. "Take it, Harry, and give it to Basil when he returns. It is not safe here." "Shall I take the emerald?" asked Harry, putting the envelope containing the will in the breast pocket of his pea jacket. Colpster snatched the gem to his breast and nursed it there like a baby. "No, no, no!" he cried vehemently. "I can't part with that. I'll die before any one shall have it but me. Give me some more wine." Still clutching the jewel, he drank another glass of port, and became quite strong again with the stimulant. Meanwhile Theodore lay stiffly on the carpet, cursing volubly. Harry kicked him. "Shut your mouth," said the sailor, "or I'll gag you." "I'll have you arrested for this," repeated Theodore, impotently scowling. "That's all right," said Pentreddle, and drawing a chair near the sofa, he turned to the Squire. "Now, sir, we must have a talk." "What's the matter?" asked Colpster in some alarm. "Where have you been to, and where have you come from?" "I'll tell you, sir, if you'll listen. On the night I left here that Japanese, Akira, followed me up the road, when I was making for my friend and the trap on the moors." "Ah!" Theodore groaned. "That was why he went to bed early. I knew that he was up to some game. He pretended to go to bed and followed me. Quite right, sir. He did. And he told me all about the murder of my poor mother." "What?" Colpster gasped. "Are you the person Akira said he would send to tell me all that I wished to know?" Pentreddle nodded grimly. "I am the person. I went to London next day with Count Akira, and he introduced me to a person who knew all about the murder. I got it written down, signed, and witnessed in a proper manner. Then I came here with the Count in his yacht, and arrived just in time to save that devil," he pointed to Theodore, "from committing a second crime." "A second crime?" echoed the Squire, bewildered. "I don't understand." "It's a lie! A lie!" howled Theodore, straining at his bonds. "If I were free, I'd dash the lie down your throat." "And my teeth, too, you murdering beast," said Harry, clenching his hands. I owe you one for the murder of my mother." Colpster sprang to his feet with surprising alacrity, considering his late exhaustion. "Murder? Did he pointed a shaking finger at the mass on the floor. "Did he murder Martha?" "Yes," said Harry sadly. "It's a lie, a lie!" muttered Theodore again and again, struggling fiercely. "It's the truth. Sit down, Mr. Colpster, and I'll tell you all about it. I have the document of an eye witness, signed and witnessed here." He touched his breast pocket. "An eye witness?" said Colpster, resuming his seat heavily. "Yes, that priest with the scar on his cheek I told you about, who saw me watching The Home of Art." "He did it himself, you fool!" roared Theodore, defending his lost cause. "So I thought, and I was going out to Japan to kill him. But I know that you were with my mother on that night, for the priest saw you enter the house by the window. You tapped there, and my mother let you in. The priest was watching the house, as he fancied the emerald might be there. He got on to the balcony and peeped through the window. He saw you struggle with my mother, you brute, and stab her. Then you left the room and hunted the house for the emerald. When you came out, the priest, thinking you might have it, waited at the gate and tried to seize you. You escaped, and he lost you in the fog. But he retained hold of the white silk scarf you wore round your throat. It is here." Pentreddle took a folded square of silk from his pocket and shook it out. "Your name is in the corner, your name in full, hang you! Look, Squire, look!" And Harry, his hands shaking with emotion, pointed out the name Theodore Dane, marked on the silk with blue thread. "You see, sir, he is guilty." "Oh!" the Squire groaned, as he saw the evidence of his nephew's wickedness, and he laid the emerald on the table so that he could the more easily cover his face with his hands. "It's terrible, terrible, that one of my blood should be an assassin, that one of my blood should be hanged." "Oh, he won't be hanged," said Harry, refolding the silk scarf and replacing it in his pocket. "I am going to leave him to Akira." What do you mean?" quavered Theodore, with sudden terror. The young sailor walked over to him and looked into his face. "Akira told me that he would attend to your punishment. What he means I don't know. But what I do know is that these Japanese can make things very unpleasant for you. I have heard of their ingenuity in torturing." "Torturing?" Theodore shrieked. "Yes. Hanging's too good for you, beast that you are." "Oh, Harry, don't let Akira get hold of me!" screamed Dane, all his nerve broken down. "The law won't let him! The law won't let him!" "He won't trouble about the law. He will send sailors ashore this very night and have you taken on board his yacht. When you are on the high seas, he'll deal with you." "No, no!" Theodore tried to kiss the man's foot and rolled over to do so. Harry spurned him. "You worse than devil! Try and be a man! You murdered a poor weak woman, and now you're frightened of your skin. Beast!" Outside, the wind had risen to wild fury. The whole house was shaken by the gusts, which came howling from the bay. Harry strode to the window and looked out. He saw by the swaying of the festival lights that the Mikado was dragging at her moorings. There was no time to be lost, if he wanted to carry out his promise to the Count. Colpster was lying limply on the sofa, while Theodore moaned and groaned on the floor. On the small table beside the sofa gleamed the emerald which had brought about all the trouble. "Let me be arrested and hanged. I don't want to be tortured," wailed the man on the floor. "Did you kill my mother?" "Give me some wine, and I'll tell you." "I shan't," said Harry, then thought better of it, and poured a glass of port down his enemy's throat. "Now tell." "I really didn't mean to kill her," said Theodore, and Colpster raised his head to listen. "I followed Martha up to London, intending when she got the Mikado Jewel to make her give it to me." "Why?" asked the Squire, looking very old and grey. Because you said that the one who produced the jewel would be your heir. Curse you!" shrieked Theodore savagely. "You are the cause of all the beastly trouble. I learned from Martha in an indirect way that Harry was coming, and then I met him." "Yes," said the sailor bitterly, "and like a fool I told you too much." "You told me nothing," said Dane, scowling. "Your mother wanted the emerald for Basil. But I got into your room at the boarding house you lived in at Pimlico, and I read your mother's letters." "You did?" "Yes. She said that she would be alone on that night and would come to get the emerald. I went to the house to see if she had left. I knocked at the door, but no one came, so I went to the window and saw her lying on the sofa near the fire. I called out to her and asked her to let me in." "She couldn't get off the sofa, you fool!" cried the Squire. "She could, and she did. I said that I had found out that Harry had been killed by the Japanese for the sake of the emerald. Then she crawled to the window and let me in." "You beast!" said Pentreddle, gritting his teeth. "You've told a lie." "Martha would not have admitted me if I'd not done so. She got me into the room, and then I insisted that she should give me the emerald." "She hadn't got it." "She wouldn't confess that she hadn't. Perhaps she feared lest I should intercept her messenger, Miss Carrol, on the way home, and rob her of the jewel. At all events, she gave me to understand nothing, and I really believe that the emerald was in her pocket. I tried to get it. Then she brought out that damned stiletto and stabbed at me. I wrested it from her, and in the struggle somehow I drove it into her throat." "You intended to!" shouted the Squire, rising to shake his two clenched hands over the criminal. "I swear I did not," panted Dane. "It was really an accident. When I saw what I had done I grew afraid. I thought that I heard someone outside." "So you did," interrupted Harry sharply. "It was the watching priest." "If I'd known," Theodore scowled, and his eyes gleamed in a most murderous manner. "But I didn't. I saw that Martha was dead or dying, and opened the window to throw the stiletto into the area. Then I searched her clothing for the emerald and afterwards the bedrooms." "Oh, and you say you did not murder her?" raged the Squire. "Not intentionally. I swear that I did not. But seeing that she was dead, it was just as well to hunt for what I wanted. I found nothing, so I came down and got out by the window. Just outside the gate, someone, that infernal priest as I now know, snatched at my shoulder and grabbed my scarf. I slipped him in the fog, and that's all." "Quite enough, too." "You shall hang," cried the Squire. "No," said Pentreddle, rising and making for the window. "He shan't hang." He threw up the window and the fierce gale came howling into the room. "I shall call up Akira's sailors," shouted the young man. "Don't! Don't!" screamed Dane. "They'll torture me." "Serve you right," said his uncle fiercely. "You have brought shame and disgrace upon the family." "Mr. Colpster." The Squire turned as he heard his name mentioned, and saw that Harry had picked up the Mikado jewel. "I take this back to Akira." "You shan't! You shan't! It's mine!" And the old man dashed forward with outstretched hands while the wind drove wildly into the rooms. A roar of laughter came from the bound man on the floor. "Ha, ha, ha!" he screamed. "Uncle, you're done for! You're done for! Ha, ha, ha!" "Give! Give! Give!" whimpered Colpster, trying to seize Pentreddle. "It is mine! It is mine!" "It belongs to the Temple of Kitzuki," said Harry, backing towards the window. "I stole it, and now I am going to return it. I promised to do so if Akira told me who murdered my mother. Keep back, sir! Keep back!" Theodore roared with laughter and twisted himself round to see what would happen. Colpster, his eyes filled with mad anger, dashed at Pentreddle, who evaded him dexterously, and before the Squire knew his intention, slipped like an eel out of the window. Harry clambered down the ivy with the cleverness of a sailor, and saw above him the wild, despairing face of the Squire, while he heard the loud, ironical laughter of the bound man. The rain was coming down in torrents, dashed here and there by the wind. The sailor slipped and fell on his back, but was up again in a moment and made for the beach. He heard high above the sound of wind and wave the thin lamentations of Colpster, who saw the luck of his family being carried away forever. Pentreddle raced for the beach through the furious weather. There he shouted as he stumbled towards the pier, and immediately two Japanese took him by the shoulders to tumble him boldly into the launch. They seemed to be in a desperate hurry, for scarcely had he got his breath when he found that the launch was plunging at full speed through the turbulent water. "What the devil is the hurry?" gasped Harry, shaking the water from his eyes. The answer did not come from the Japanese, who were driving the boat out to sea at high pressure, but from the land. There was a low, moaning sound, which boomed like an organ note above the tumult of the elements. It grew louder and more insistent, and droned like a giant bee. The mere sound was terrifying, and Harry saw the bronze faces of the sailors blanch with fear. Suddenly the note grew shrill, like a cry of triumph, and then came a loud crash, which seemed to shake the earth. Far and wide he could hear, even through the tempest, the splashing of great fragments into the sea, and the crumbling of mighty masses on the land. Then came a stillness, and the wind dropped gradually to low whimperings. "The cliff has fallen," said the Japanese officer. "It is the Earth Spirit." "This," said Harry, his face gray with terror, and showed the Mikado Jewel flashing in the light of the lamps. The sailors fell on their faces before its sinister glare. Only the officer, unable to desert his post, although his face was ghastly white and his limbs shook, continued to steer the launch seaward. Chapter 19. Chapter 20 of The Mikado Jewel by Fergus HUME. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Pierard. Chapter 20. A Further Explanation. The morning dawned, raw and bleak, to display the scene of the disaster in its most searching light. None of those who had come to the entertainment were allowed to go on shore during the hours of darkness. Basil, indeed, as soon as Akira informed him of the catastrophe, and Akira seemed to know positively what had taken place, even before the arrival of the steam launch with the news, wished to see what had become of his uncle and brother. But the Japanese pointed out that fragments of the cliff were still falling, and that it would be dangerous to venture. As every hour or so the thunder of falling masses was heard, Dane considered that the advice was good, and possessed his soul in patience until the dawn. Frequently during the night he lamented that he had not the searchlight of his own ship to see what extent of damage was done. But of course such wishing was altogether vain. As the Miko was large, there was plenty of accommodation, and the servants were persuaded to go below and sleep. The women were very hysterical, and the men greatly upset. Every one was devoted to the Squire, and hoped against hope that he had been saved. But it was noticeable that no one troubled about Theodore. Until that night Basil had no idea how very unpopular his brother really was. But he had not much time to think, as the greater part of his time was spent in soothing Patricia. She felt the dreadful accident and its consequences much more than did Mara. That young lady neither wept nor expressed any great sorrow. With a rigid face she stared into the gloom which veiled the home of her childhood, and made scarcely any remark. Akira, when Harry came on board, privately asked him if he thought that either Colpster or his nephew had escaped. "I'm certain they have not," said Pentreddle emphatically. "Mr. Theodore was tied up, and the last I saw of the Squire he was at the window cursing me for taking away the Mikado Jewel." "Ah, yes, you brought that away with you?" Akira held out his hand. Harry produced the jewel, which he had thrust carelessly into his pocket after his glimpse of it on the launch. "They all fell on their faces," he told the Japanese. Akira smiled in a peculiar manner. "No wonder, when they saw the might of the Earth Spirit." "What do you mean exactly, sir?" asked the sailor, quite puzzled. The Count handled the jewel reverently, and producing a sandalwood box, carefully wrapped up the emerald and its jade setting in fine silk before placing it therein. "I mean that this jewel holds the power of the earth spirit, and pulled down the cliff on those who had to be punished," was his remark, as he locked the box and put it away safely. "Is this the punishment you intended for Mr. Theodore for murdering my mother?" asked Pentreddle, with a faltering voice. "Yes. Are you not satisfied?" "I thought you would have taken him on board and tortured him." Akira drew himself to his full height, which was not very great. Still, in his indignation, he contrived to look quite imperial. "I am a Japanese gentleman, and do not torture any one. I knew that the cliff would fall as soon as you left the house, and that those behind would be crushed." "But how could you make the cliff fall?" persisted Harry. "The earth spirit brought the fall about through its power stored in the jewel of Go Yojo. Do you understand?" "No," said the bluff sailor, frankly bewildered. "Well, then, I can explain no more. You must take it that there was an accident, owing to the late rains. The earth fell for that reason. But you are revenged on your enemy. Now tell me all that took place." Harry did not require much urging, and related everything. Akira listened in silence. "Hai!" said he, when the tale was ended. "This poor wretch was ready to commit a second murder. So much evil we have saved him. Have you the will he spoke of?" "Yes." Pentreddle produced it from his pocket, but Akira did not offer to take it. In fact, he refused to touch it. "Give it to Mr. Dane, as you have been instructed. I am glad to hear that he will inherit the property. I have a great opinion of Mr. Dane, and a better one of the charming young lady he is going to marry." "I'll give it to him," said Pentreddle. "And now, sir, what is to become of me, if you please?" "Well," said Akira quietly, "as you have restored the emerald, you are no longer in danger. I give you your life. Also, and because you obeyed my instructions so implicitly, you can have these." And he produced 10 notes of £10 each. £100, my friend. "I couldn't touch them, sir. It would look as though I wanted to take money for avenging my poor mother's death." "That is very creditable to you, Pentreddle, but I don't think you need decline. You have been useful to me and deserve payment." Thus persuaded, Harry gladly took the notes, but as he placed them in his pocket he observed gloomily that he thought Theodore Dane had died in too easy a manner. Akira shook his head and rebuked him. "My friend, that Mr. Dane broke the great law, and when next he is born he will have to pay back to your mother all he owes her. By wishing to torture him, as you suggested to me, you are only preparing trouble for yourself. He has been partly punished. Leave him, as to the rest, to the great law." "What is the great law?" "As you sow, so shall you reap," said Akira quietly. "I have heard that before, sir." "It is in your sacred book, my friend, but few of your people in the West understand its real meaning. They think that the master who said it takes the reaping on his own shoulders, while they sit in happiness and see it done." Akira shrugged his shoulders. "A great many of these foolish ones will be undeceived when their karma is ripe." "Karma?" The Count arose and shook his head. "We must not talk on these subjects, as I am no priest," he said with a smile. "All I tell you is, that you must obey the great law, or suffer according to your breaking of it. Now go and give the will to Mr. Dane." Pentreddle did so, and when questioned as to how it came into his possession, related all that he knew, and how he had brought back the will to its rightful owner. Patricia was present when he explained, and both she and her lover were horrified to hear that Theodore had murdered the poor woman. They questioned and cross-questioned him until he was weary and excused himself so that he might get a little sleep. But there was none for the young couple. "If Theodore is indeed dead, it is a mercy," said Basil thankfully. "Oh, dearest, dead in his sin?" "Oh," said the young man rather cynically, "if one had to wait until Theodore, from what I knew of him, was fit to die, he would have become immortal. No, darling," he added quickly, catching sight of Patricia's pained face, "I don't mean to be flippant. God have mercy on his soul, I say, with all my heart, but he was a thoroughly bad man." "Well, he is dead, so let us think no more about him." So they said, and so they felt. But throughout that weary night they continued to talk of the scamp. Also they referred regretfully to the death of the Squire, and Patricia wept for the old man who had been so kind to her. In the end, grief and anxiety wore her out, and she fell asleep on Basil's breast. They sat in a sheltered corner of the deck, for Miss Carrol refused to be parted from her lover. In the grey, grim light they finally saw the ruin which had been wrought by the fall of the mighty cliff. There were vast rents in its breast, and it was by no means so high as it had been. Below was a tumbled mass of red rock, beneath which not only the Hall but the greater part of the grounds were buried. That which had been Beckleigh was now a thing of the past, for in no way could that enormous quantity of rubble and rock and sand and stone be lifted. The whole formed a gigantic tumulus, such as of yore had been heaped over the body of some barbarous chief. Squire Colpster and his wicked nephew certainly had a magnificent monument to mark the place where they reposed. Amidst all that fallen rock it was impossible to rebuild the Hall or to reconstruct the grounds. "We have the income," said Basil, while he stood on deck with his arm round Patricia's waist, looking at the ruin, "but our home is gone for ever." Patricia shuddered. "I am sorry, of course, for it is such a lovely place." "Was such a lovely place, my dear." "Yes, yes. But I always felt afraid when in the Hall. I felt certain that some day the cliff would fall. It always seemed hostile to me." "It was only hostile to two people," said the quiet voice of Akira behind them. "The man who murdered for the sake of the emerald, and the man who set in motion the causes which brought the emerald to Beckleigh. Both have paid for their sins." "Whatever do you mean, Count?" "I shall tell you and Dane when we go ashore," said the Japanese calmly. "In the meantime come down and have some breakfast. You look faint, Miss Carrol, and it is time that you restored your strength. Go down and see my wife, and she will look after you." When Patricia descended the companion, Akira turned to Basil. "Excuse me, Dane," he said courteously, "but this fall of the cliff has robbed you of your home. You will want money. Allow me to be your banker." "Thank you, but there is really no need," said Basil hastily. "I have £5 or £6 in my pocket, enough to take myself and Miss Carrol to London. Once we are there, I shall see my uncle's lawyers about the will, and get them to advance what I require." "But all these servants who are homeless?" "They can go to their various relatives and friends. I shall get the lawyers to send money for them. Don't be afraid, Akira. I shan't neglect my people, for they are mine now, you know. Unless—" he cast a hopeful glance at the scarred face of the cliff. "No. Both the Squire and your brother are dead. They will lie under that mighty pile of earth to the end of time, unless some high tide washes it away. Of course, I mean their sheaths will. Their souls are now reaping according to the sowing. Come to breakfast." Basil descended, and with Patricia and the bridal couple had an excellent breakfast, which was much needed. It was useless to sorrow for the dead to the extent of starving for them, for Basil had seen very little of his uncle for many years, and certainly had no cause to mourn for Theodore. As for Mara, she was as cool and composed as ever, and ate so well that no one would ever have believed that she had just lost her father. "It is no use crying over spilt milk," she said, making use of her favourite proverb. And although both her cousin and Patricia considered that she was decidedly heartless, they could not deny the good sense of the saying she invariably quoted as an excuse for her indifference. But she was not sufficiently hard-hearted to remain behind, although her feeling may have been merely one of curiosity, for she came on deck cloaked and gloved, and with her hat on. ready to join the party. Akira promptly told her that he did not wish her to go, and as his slightest wish was law to her, she obeyed. The yacht was to sail somewhere about noon, so there would be no chance for Basil and Patricia to come on board again. Nor did they want to, seeing that at present they had so much to think about. So they said good bye to the Countess Akira and departed along with the melancholy household that had now no home. The launch took them ashore under what seemed an ironically sunny and blue sky. After the late rains and storms it was cheerful to see the water of the bay sparkle in the sunlight. But alas! Beckleigh was as ruined as ever was Pompeii, and in future the fairy bay would only be stretched out before a desolate scene. Patricia almost wept when she saw the ruin of the beauty spot. Not a vestige of the house was to be seen. It was crushed flat under tons of red earth, while nearly down to the water's edge great sandstone rocks and much rubble had smashed the trees and obliterated the flower beds. And over the gigantic heaps of debris the mighty cliff still soared, rent and scarred, although not to its original height. Early as the day was, many people, both men and women, were moving amongst the rubbish, seeing what they could pick up. But there was absolutely nothing to be found. The enormous fall of tons and tons of earth had pulverized Beckleigh into dust. It was like the ruins of a prehistoric world. Many people came down when they saw the approaching launch, amongst them relatives of the servants, together with friends. These took charge of the homeless wanderers, and gradually the whole household disappeared up the winding road to find shelter. Before they departed, Basil informed them that within a week he would return to Hendle and attend to their needs, as he had inherited the property. Although the young man was a favourite, the dispossessed were too miserable to raise a cheer, and departed with sad faces and hanging heads. Their world was in ruins, and save what they stood up in, all were without money or home. But the promise made by their new master that he would look after them cheered them not a little. Akira, after he had walked round the desolation with Basil and Patricia, asked them to return to the pier. Here he had seats brought up from the launch, and they sat down to hear what he had to say. His first speech rather surprised them, used as they were becoming to the happening of the unexpected. "I am sorry that all this has occurred," he said seriously, waving his hand towards the ruins, "but I had to bring it about." They looked at one another and then at the speaker, believing, and with some reason, that he was crazy. "How could you possibly bring it about?" asked Mr. Dane in a sceptical tone. "The Mikado Jewel brought it about." "Oh!" Patricia winced. "Are you going to talk more of this occult nonsense?" "Can you call it nonsense in the face of this, Miss Carrol?" "That is an accident owing to the late rains." "Quite so, and that is what the world will consider it. But I can tell you differently. It happened because the Mikado Jewel was in the house." "It was not," said Basil imperatively, and would have gone on talking, but that Patricia stopped him. "It was in the house," she said quickly. "Only Mr. Colpster, poor man, asked Theodore and myself to say nothing about it." Basil cast a glance at the red heaps. "Then it is buried under this rubbish?" he said disdainfully. "For all its occult power, it couldn't look after itself." "I looked after it," said Akira quietly. "It is now on board the yacht, and I am taking it back to Japan to restore it to the Temple of Kitzuki." "How did you get it, Akira?" "Pentreddle, by my desire, took it from the Squire when he went last night to accuse Theodore, your brother, of murder." "He did not tell me that," said Basil involuntarily. "I asked him not to, as I wished to tell you myself. I am sorry to bore you with occult talk, Miss Carrol, but I think you would like to understand the reason for the jewel being at Beckleigh at all." "You sent it to Mr. Colpster?" "Yes, I did, to punish him for daring to have it stolen from Kitzuki." "But he didn't wish it stolen. He was angry that Harry should steal it." Akira waved his hand. "Mr. Colpster was the original cause of setting in motion the causes which led to Mrs. Pentreddle's death, to his own death, and to that of his nephew. He believed that the jewel would bring back luck. Instead of that, it brought that." And he pointed to the ruins. Basil looked helplessly at the speaker. "My dear fellow, I am quite in the dark as to what you are talking about." "Listen, and I shall explain. Something of what I tell you has been told to you before, but something I now tell you is new." He drew a long breath and continued: "I don't expect you to believe all I say." "We'll try," said Basil ironically. "Go on." "Mr. Colpster wished for the Mikado Jewel," said Akira deliberately, "and so he employed you, Dane, to offer money for it. Mrs. Pentreddle heard from her late master that he intended to give the property to the nephew who brought back the jewel. She hated Theodore and loved you, so, as her son was going to Japan, she asked him to get the jewel. In a way which she told Mr. Colpster, but which I need not repeat, he stole it, and got away with it. But he was followed and watched. The priest of the temple told the government at Tokio, and I was deputed to see if the jewel could be recovered. I went to Kitzuki and saved your life when you came to offer money for the gem." "And thank you for doing it, Akira," said Basil heartily. "All right. I was only too pleased, since the information you gave me about the emerald having been presented to one of your queens helped me to unravel the mystery. Several attempts were made to get the gem from Pentreddle while he was in Japan, but all failed. I therefore sent 2 men to watch for the arrival of his ship in London, and followed myself. I knew that I had made you my friend, and intended to come to Beckleigh, if it was necessary. When I arrived in London, I found that Pentreddle was trying to give the jewel to his mother, and learned, through his hanging round the house, that the old lady was staying at the Home of Art in Crook Street." "And you had that watched, I suppose?" "Of course," replied Akira serenely. "A man with a scar on his cheek, who was an attendant in the Temple of Kitzuki, watched that house. Then I learned where Pentreddle was boarding in Pimlico, and my second man gained access to his room. His letters, which he left about, were read, and I learned that his mother intended to meet him at the Serpentine in the way we know of. I followed him when he went to keep the appointment." "What?" cried Patricia. "Was it you, Count, who snatched the jewel from me?" "Yes. I noticed that Pentreddle passed you the box, and followed you. I fancied you would take the box home, but you sat down to examine it." "It was the strange drawing power which made me open the box. I wanted to see what caused the power." "I fear," answered Akira, rather ironically, "that your curiosity was not gratified. However, as the power still radiated from the stone, keeping off all things that would hurt it, I reversed the power, or rather stopped it altogether." "How did you manage that?" asked Basil doubtfully. Akira shook his head. "I cannot tell you. I dare not. It is a secret. And even if I did, you would only laugh, since you do not believe in these sort of things. I knew the necessary mantra to say and said it." He looked at Patricia with a smile. "You felt the difference." "Yes," she nodded, with a look of something like awe. "Then you snatched it." "Of course, and the jewel being recovered, I would then and there have taken it back to Japan, but for the murder of Mrs. Pentreddle." "Theodore did murder her, then?" said Basil in a low, shamed voice. "Oh, yes, and in the way her son told you. My man with the scar saw the crime committed, and secured the scarf as evidence, with the name of your brother marked in the corner." "Bad as Theodore was," said Basil, drawing a deep breath, "I am glad that you did not shame the family by denouncing him." Akira smiled at him in a friendly way. "Of course you are my friend," he observed. "Also I wished to find young Pentreddle. I came down to Beckleigh, as you know, and left instructions to my 2 men to send down the jewel to Mr. Colpster. But before leaving London I reversed the power." "But I don't see " "I do not expect you to see, my dear man," interrupted Akira quickly. "But the jewel arrived with the power reversed." "Yes," Patricia nodded again. "I felt it," and she shivered. "Well, then," Akira glanced at his watch, "there is little more to tell. I simply waited while the Jewel did its work of loosening the cliff. All the time it was in the house it was drawing those tons of earth down on the place. I heard in the drawing room that night that Mr. Colpster was going to speak to Pentreddle, and pretended to go to bed. Instead of doing so, I got out of the window and intercepted him on the winding road. I then told him that I could prove who killed his mother, and sent him to wait for my arrival in London. He went the next morning. I came on later, and then I made my man with the scar tell him everything. Pentreddle left me with a full statement, signed by my man and witnessed. As your brother is dead and it is useless to make a scandal, said Akira, glancing at Basil, I got that document from him last night and burned it. Dane leaned forward and shook the hand of the Japanese. I am greatly obliged to you, he said with emotion. Why? Said Akira in a friendly manner. There is no reason that you should suffer for the sins of others. That would not be fair. Besides, I wish you to give Miss Carrol a clean name. Now then, do you wish to know any more, as I must up anchor and steam for the East? How many people know that my brother committed this murder? I do, and my 2 men. As we are going away for ever and will hold our tongues, you need not fear us. Harry Pentreddle will say nothing, as he respects you and Miss Carrol too much. Besides, I gave him £100 to get married on, so when he is happy himself he will not wish to make others unhappy. The Squire was the only other person who knew, and he is dead. Your name is quite safe." "Thank God for that," said Basil reverently, and took off his hat. "One question more," said Patricia, rising. "What did you mean when you told me that you now knew why you had come to Beckleigh?" "It was because of Mara," explained Akira gravely. "She was formerly a priestess in the temple of Kitzuki, and for some reason the spirit of the earth, whose spell was on the emerald, wished to bring her to my arms. We had promised to love for 7 lives, you know. For this reason the theft of the Mikado jewel was permitted. But for that, Pentreddle would have been kept back by the radiating power. Even I, with no ill intent, had to reverse, or rather break, the power, before I could take the gem from you. But, then, I know the spell." "And what is the power contained in the stone now?" Akira hesitated. "I told you that the jewel was left on board," he said, "but that was not true. I brought it with me." He produced the box from his pocket and took from it the jewel. The great stone blazed with green lustre in the sunlight. "Take it in your hands, Miss Carrol." Patricia did so, while Basil looked at the gem curiously. He had never seen it before. Suddenly Patricia cried out with delight. "Oh, yes! I feel the warmth, and the light, and the power streaming out from every petal." "Imagination," said Basil impatiently, and took the stone. "I can feel nothing of what you describe." The Count carefully replaced the jewel in its box. "You are not psychic." "I never wish to hear that word again," said Basil fervently. "I don't think you will," replied Akira dryly, and slipped the box into his pocket. "Well, now I shall say good bye, and from Japan I shall send you my wedding present." "Be kind to Mara," said Patricia imploringly. "Be sure of that. She is a sacred thing to me. Was she not the Miko of Kitzuki, and did not the Earth Spirit bring her to my arms?" He changed his reverent tone for a matter-of-fact one. "Good bye, Dane." Akira held out his hand, then suddenly drew it back. "There is one thing I should like to add, so that you may guess that I am not in favor of killing innocent people. I gave my entertainment so as to lure you, Dane, and you, Miss Carrol, together with all your servants, on board the yacht out of harm's way. Therefore Mr. Colpster and the assassin were left to their fate alone in the house." "But Pentreddle?" asked Basil, shuddering. Akira looked towards the winding road up which Harry was slowly climbing. "I had to send him to get the jewel," he remarked, "but I warned him of the danger and he escaped. Now that is all I have to tell," he added quickly, seeing that Patricia was about to ask another question. "Good bye, both of you, once more." They shook hands gravely all round. Then Akira jumped into his launch and it steamed away in a great hurry, as usual. Basil and Patricia set their faces landward and picked their way over the loose rocks. In a short time, and walking above the grave of uncle and cousin, they gained the clear space of the winding road. Here they came face to face with Mrs. Lee, who was toiling down all alone. "Ah," she said with a chuckle, "so it's you, Mr. Basil." The old creature nodded. "I told him he would be crushed as flat as a pancake if he allowed it to come into the house. He did, like a silly fool, and now he is buried under all that rubbish." She pointed her staff disdainfully downwards. "Who did you tell this to, Granny?" asked Basil, who knew her well. "To your brother Theodore. Bless you, dearie, he often came to consult me. I didn't like him, though, as he brought such bad ones with him." "What is the 'it' you meant?" questioned Patricia, wondering if Mrs. Lee had any knowledge of the fatal jewel. It appeared that she had not. "Ah, lovey, they didn't tell me that. All I knew, and all I told him, was that it would crush him as flat as a pancake." She looked at the tumbled red earth and chuckled maliciously. "And it has, dearie, it has. A grave for an emperor, that is." "I don't believe these things, Granny," said Basil, placing Patricia's arm within his own. "Here's a shilling." "Bless you, dearie, may you never want bread," croaked the old crone, biting the shilling before tying it up in a corner of her apron. Then she faced them and waved a circle thrice, which she crossed once. "The sign of power to bring you luck, my dears," she explained, wagging her head. "But bless you both, ye ain't wicked to the marrow as he was. Drat him! I can see your future bright and fair." Her eyes became fixed as she spoke, and she looked into the viewless air. "You'll both be happy all your lives, for sorrow is ended and the debts of fate are paid. Money and children and rank and lots of good staunch friends. All that you desire will come to you, and the poor will bless you evermore. So be it, and let it be." After which weird speech, the old creature toddled down the hill with a senile laugh. "What do you make of that, Basil?" asked Patricia, when they reached the top of the winding road and came in sight of the carriage which was to take them to Hendle railway station. "Well," said the young man reflectively, "after what has taken place I dare not disbelieve in many things." "I hope that what Granny says will come true." "My dear," Basil, amidst all his trouble, turned to catch her in his arms, "I am sure that with such a darling as you are for my wife, everything is entirely feasible and possible. If the emerald of Amyas Colpster brought luck to no one, it certainly has done so to me. And now let us drive to Hendle, and catch the evening train to London. Tomorrow we must get married." "It seems heartless when your uncle is just dead," sighed Patricia. "But I have no home to go to, and no one but you." "You shall stay at the Home of Art, and when I marry you, my dear, Mrs. Sellars shall be the bridesmaid. Come, my darling." The sound of a gun stopped them before they could take a single step towards the new life, which spread out so brightly before them. They turned to see the Mikado standing out to sea with the black smoke pouring from her funnel. As they waved their handkerchiefs, the yacht dipped her ensign and fired a second gun. Then they saw her turn her nose seaward and steam direct for Japan. And the boat was carrying the Mikado Jewel, after it had fulfilled its mission in the West, back to its shrine in the temple of Kitzuki in the province of Izumo. End of chapter 20. End of The Mikado Jewel by Fergus Hume.